Kael'vas had spent 40 years as a diplomat. He had stood in rooms where wars were decided. He had shaken hands, or done the equivalent, with kings, warlords, and council chairs. He was not easily surprised. He told himself this often. He believed it, mostly. He stopped believing it on the day he arrived at Helix Station and a human handed him a cup of coffee. The station floated in the cold dark at the far edge of human space, a wide ring of metal and light orbiting a brown dwarf that gave off more heat than brightness. Kael'vas had requested the meeting point himself. Neutral ground. Somewhere the humans would feel comfortable enough to send their real representatives, not just political figures in clean uniforms. He had read every report the Council had on human military capability. He had studied the engagements, the casualty ratios, the strange and troubling details that kept appearing in field records from species who had made the mistake of fighting them. He knew what human soldiers were. He had come prepared to be careful. The docking bay opened. 4 humans walked in. They were not what he expected. He had imagined something harder. Something that moved differently. The reports described creatures that fought through pain that would kill most species, that kept moving when they should have stopped, that made decisions under pressure with a speed and coldness that other soldiers found disturbing. He had expected them to look like that on the outside, too. Some visible sign. Instead, there was a young man at the front of the group with a rifle hanging loosely on a strap across his chest, wearing a uniform that was clean but not formal, and he was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He offered one to Kael'vas and said his name was Cole Rayner, Sergeant, 3rd Ground Division, and that the ambassador's quarters were ready on Deck 7. Kael'vas took the coffee. He did not drink it. He studied the young man's face. Cole Rayner had an open, unremarkable face. Brown eyes. A small scar near his jaw that could have come from anything. He looked like he was perhaps 25 years old, though Kael'vas knew human ages were difficult to judge. He looked like someone who worked outdoors. He did not look like a weapon. The other 3 soldiers spread out in a loose formation behind Cole, not standing at attention, not performing alertness, just present. Watching the room the way people watch a room when they have learned to always watch rooms. Kael'vas sent a short message to his aide as they walked toward the elevator. The message said, "These are not the special forces. Ask the humans if they made an error." His aide replied 20 minutes later. No error. These were the assigned security detail. Standard infantry. 3rd Ground Division. Kael'vas read the message twice. He was still thinking about it when the shooting started. It was distant, 2 decks below, somewhere in the cargo section. A sharp sound like cracking stone, repeating quickly, then a lower sound, then nothing. The whole thing lasted less than 4 minutes. Kael'vas stood in the corridor outside his quarters and counted the seconds out of old habit. His bodyguards, a pair of Varadi House soldiers who had served him for 12 years, moved in front of him immediately. Their hands went to their weapons. Their bodies went rigid in the way trained fighters go rigid when they hear a threat. Cole Rayner held up one hand, calm, unhurried, and spoke quietly into a comm unit on his wrist. He listened. He said 2 words. He clipped the comm unit and looked at Kael'vas with an expression that was somewhere between mild annoyance and professional neutrality. "Sorry about that," Cole said. "Some Dreth raiders got into the lower cargo bay. 12 of them. My team handled it." Kael'vas looked at him. "Your team," he said. "Yes, sir." "The 4 of you?" "Yes, sir." "Nobody on your staff was in any danger. We had eyes on the cargo level before they even got through the outer seal." One of Kael'vas's Varadi bodyguards, a veteran named Har who had been in 3 wars, was staring at Cole Rayner. Not with hostility. With something closer to the careful attention a person gives to a thing they are trying to understand and cannot quite. 12, Har said, quietly, to no one in particular. Cole glanced at him. "Do you want a report?" "I can get you a report." "No," Kael'vas said. "No, that is not necessary." Cole nodded. He picked up both coffee cups from the small table where they had been sitting. He handed the second one back to Kael'vas. "Yours probably went cold. I can get a fresh one if you want." Kael'vas looked down at the cup. Then at Cole. Then at the corridor where, 2 decks below, 12 Dreth Raiders had just been neutralized by 4 people who were now offering him a warm drink. Yes, he said finally. A fresh one would be good. Cole nodded and turned to go get it. He did not look like a man who had just done something remarkable. He looked like a man who had a list of tasks and was working through them in order. Kael'vas stood in the corridor for a moment after he left. Har was still quiet beside him. The other Varadi guard, younger, less experienced, was looking at the floor with an expression that Kael'vas recognized. It was the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just shifted slightly and had not yet settled back into place. Kael'vas understood the feeling. He had it himself. He sent another message to his aide. This one said, "Pull every file we have on the 3rd Ground Division. Not the special units. The regular ones. All of it." Then he went inside his quarters and waited for his coffee. He thought about 12. He thought about 4 minutes. He thought about the way Cole Rayner's hands had been completely still when the shooting was happening below them, and how the stillness was not the stillness of someone frozen but the stillness of someone who had already decided what to do and was simply waiting to be needed. He thought about the way Har, who had stood in front of artillery fire and not moved, had said 12 in that quiet voice. He thought, if this is what they send for ordinary work, what do they send when they are trying? The coffee arrived. Cole set it down, gave a small nod, and went back to the corridor to stand watch. Kael'vas held the cup and did not drink it for a long time. Drossel had been an analyst for the Galactic Council for 19 years. She was good at her job. She was careful, thorough, and she did not frighten easily, which, in her line of work, was more important than it sounded. She had read reports on things that most species preferred not to think about. She had processed data on wars and plagues and the slow collapses of civilizations that had lasted longer than her own species had been writing things down. She had never, until now, found a database that made her feel like something was wrong with her understanding of the universe. The assignment had seemed simple. In the wake of Ambassador Kael'vas's report from Helix Station, and the attached note from his bodyguard Har, which was 3 lines long and said almost nothing but somehow communicated a great deal, the Council had asked for a full threat assessment on human military capability. Not just the special forces. All of it. A complete picture. Drossel started the same way she always started. She pulled incident reports. Engagement records. After-action summaries filed by species who had encountered human soldiers in combat, whether as enemies, as allies, or as bystanders who happened to be standing nearby when things went badly. She had access to over 1,000 such documents. She began reading. 3 days later she was still reading, and she had stopped sleeping the way she normally slept. The problem was not the special forces. She had expected the special forces to be impressive. Every species with a functioning military had some version of them, elite units, specially selected and trained, capable of things the average soldier could not do. The human version was well documented and genuinely alarming, but it was at least understandable within the framework she already had. You trained the best ones harder. You gave them better equipment. You sent them where ordinary soldiers would fail. This made sense. What did not make sense was everything else. The river crossing incident. She found it in a report filed by a Keth medical team that had been operating near the border conflict on the Outer Reach. A human platoon had taken heavy fire while evacuating wounded personnel from a collapsed forward position. Most of the platoon got out. One soldier did not. A private named Danny Okafor, age 22, had stayed behind and held the only crossing point on the river for 6 hours while his platoon moved the wounded to a safe extraction zone. He was hit twice during that time. He kept the crossing. The platoon got out. He got out too, at the end, because a medic came back for him even though the medic had been ordered not to. Danny Okafor was not special forces. He was a private. He had been in service for 14 months. She flagged the report and kept reading. The Mountain Pass engagement. 300 Garathi shock troops, some of the heaviest infantry in the known galaxy, physically enormous, trained from birth, attempting to push through a narrow pass that a human unit was holding. The human unit was 41 soldiers. Standard infantry. They held the pass for 30 hours until reinforcement arrived. Casualty reports from the Garathi side were, she checked the numbers 3 times, because the first 2 times she thought she had made an error. None of the 41 humans were special forces. She pulled their service records. A cook. A signals operator. A man who had been, before the war, a high school teacher in a place called Ohio. They held the pass. She kept going. She read for another full day. The pattern did not change. It became, if anything, more consistent. The moments of impossible, record-breaking, should not have worked military action in human history were not dominated by special forces. They were full of ordinary people. Farmers and mechanics and students and people who had grown up in quiet towns and joined the military for reasons that had nothing to do with wanting to be warriors. She called Admiral Vass on a secure channel. He was a Varadi officer, senior enough to have been involved in 3 major engagements, and he had a reputation for not being easily disturbed. He answered the call from his desk. "Sir," Drossel said, "I have completed approximately 60% of the threat assessment." And she looked at her screen. At the list of names she had compiled. At the ages, the ranks, the civilian backgrounds, the actions that each of them had taken and survived and apparently considered simply part of the work. "I don't think the special forces are the thing we should be afraid of," she said. There was a pause. "Explain." "The special forces are the ones the humans formally recognize as exceptional. They have selection processes and extra training and they are sent to do things regular soldiers cannot. But sir, when I look at what their regular soldiers actually do, the ones who are not selected, not specially trained, not given any extra preparation," she stopped. She tried to find the right words. "The gap between their regular soldiers and their special forces is smaller than the gap between their regular soldiers and our best units." Another pause. Longer this time. "That is a significant claim," Vass said. "I know, sir." "You are certain of the data?" "I have checked it repeatedly." She hesitated. Then she said what she had been thinking for 2 days. "Sir, I think the special forces are not the ceiling. I think they are simply the visible ceiling. The floor of what a human soldier is willing and able to do is already above the ceiling of what we train our best soldiers to do." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Vass said, "Complete the assessment. And Drossel, send me the raw files. All of them. I want to read them myself." She sent them. Then she requested a meeting with Captain Laura Neff, the human military liaison assigned to the Council Observer Office. Laura arrived the next morning, relaxed, wearing her uniform jacket open at the collar, carrying a cup of something hot. She sat across from Drossel and listened patiently while Drossel pulled up Danny Okafor's file. "Is he special forces?" Drossel asked. "No," Laura said. "Was he augmented? Specially selected?" Laura looked at the file. "He grew up on a farm. He likes fishing. Last I heard he's working kitchen duty at a base on the Pacific coast." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that the part that's confusing you?" Drossel looked at her. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly the part that is confusing me." Laura nodded slowly, like she was genuinely trying to find a way to explain something she had never needed to explain before because everyone around her already understood it. She looked at the file for a moment. Then she said, simply, "He needed to stay. So he stayed." Drossel waited for more. There was no more. That was the whole explanation. She wrote it down anyway. The moon of Dreth 4 was cold and gray and covered in broken rock that looked like something enormous had chewed it up and spat it back out. It had no breathable air and no water and nothing living on it, which made it ideal for a military exercise. Nobody could get hurt by accident. Nobody could complain that the noise disturbed them. You could blow things up and fire weapons and drive heavy vehicles across the terrain and the moon simply absorbed it all and stayed quiet. The council had proposed the joint exercise 6 weeks after Drossel filed her assessment. The official reason was cooperation, building the foundation for future allied operations, understanding each other's capabilities, establishing trust. The unofficial reason, which everyone involved understood without saying out loud, was that the council needed to see the humans in action with their own eyes. The reports were one thing. Watching was another. The humans agreed without much discussion. They sent a company from the 7th Infantry. 112 soldiers, standard equipment, no special units. Their commanding officer was a woman named Colonel Priya Vasquez, 41 years old, 20 years of service, 3 previous combat deployments. She arrived at the pre-exercise briefing with a worn paperback novel tucked into her breast pocket and a calm, attentive manner that the council observers could not quite read. The council's side was more carefully assembled. Variety heavy infantry, the best conventional ground troops the collective had, big and disciplined and trained for endurance fighting. Keth marksmen, long-limbed and precise, with sensory capabilities that made them exceptional at long-range target identification. Together they numbered 160. They had numbers, physical advantages, and equipment that was in several respects technically superior. The scenario was a 4-day exercise across a 30-kilometer stretch of highland terrain. 3 objective points, a communications relay, a ridge position, and a supply cache, had to be controlled. The side holding the most objectives at the end of day 4 won. Simple enough. The council observers set up their monitoring equipment, established a safe observation platform, and settled into watch. They expected a hard fight. They expected the humans to perform well enough to be taken seriously, perhaps to hold one objective for a significant stretch of time, to demonstrate why the reports said what they said. They did not know exactly what to expect, but they had ranges in their minds, upper and lower limits of how the exercise might go. By the end of day 1, they had exceeded all of those ranges. The humans had taken all 3 objectives. This alone was unusual but not impossible. They had moved faster than expected and used the terrain in ways that the Variety commanders had not anticipated. What was harder to explain was the supply cache. At some point during the first day, while the Variety and Keth forces were still organizing their initial positions, the humans had found the council's secondary supply cache, a location that had not been included in any briefing material given to the human side, and had quietly moved it to a different location. They had not reported this. They had not used the supplies. They had simply relocated the cache and continued the exercise, apparently on the logic that if you have the opportunity to complicate your opponent's situation, you should take it, even if it was not technically part of the assignment. The council's logistics officer spent 2 hours looking for the cache before a human soldier, unprompted, directed him to the new location. The human soldier was apologetic. He said he assumed they would figure it out eventually. Day 2 was worse, from the council's perspective. The Keth marksmen, species with exceptional long-range perception, trained snipers who could identify a target at distances that most species could not see clearly, refused to advance into broken terrain after midday. Their unit commander filed an observation report that was difficult to summarize. The core of it was, we know there are humans in the rocks. We cannot see them. We cannot locate them. Every time we advance, something happens that makes us feel like we made a mistake. The feeling is not rational, he wrote, but it is consistent, and my soldiers are responding to it in ways that are reducing our effectiveness. The council observers reviewed the monitoring data from that section of the terrain. They found 1 human soldier. 1. He had spent 14 hours in a crevice between 2 large rocks, barely moving, effectively invisible to both visual and thermal scanning because of the rock's natural heat signature. He had not fired his weapon once. He had simply been there, and the Keth marksmen had known, on some level below conscious thought, that the rocks were dangerous, and they had stopped wanting to go near the rocks. 1 soldier had neutralized an entire unit of elite marksmen without firing a shot, by being very still in a very cold crack in the ground for most of a day. By the end of day 3, the Variety ground commanders had developed a strategy. They were going to concentrate their remaining forces and make one hard push to take the ridge position. It was a sound plan. Priya Vasquez apparently anticipated it, because when the push came, the ridge position was heavily defended, the approaches were covered, and 3 separate flanking attempts were turned back within the first hour. At which point Priya called the observer's station. She sounded calm. She sounded like someone who had been doing a not particularly difficult task for 3 days and was slightly bored by it. She asked, politely, if the council wanted to end the exercise early. She said she was asking because the Variety soldiers had been operating continuously for 60 hours and she was concerned about their morale. She said this without condescension. She sounded genuinely thoughtful about it. The council observers looked at each other. The exercise was ended. In the formal debrief that followed, a Variety general named Kaur asked Priya Vasquez what her company had eaten during the exercise. He had been staring at the human ration list that a staff officer had set in front of him. Priya told him. Standard field rations. Caloric content per soldier per day. Water allowance. Kaur studied the list for a long time. He did not say anything. He was thinking about his own soldiers, what they needed to function over 3 days of continuous field operation, the nutritional requirements, the rest schedules, the careful management of physical resources that heavy infantry demanded. Then he looked at the human ration list again. Then he set it down and did not comment, because there was nothing he could say that would make the math feel less troubling. Priya Vasquez tucked her paperback back into her pocket and went to check on her soldiers. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called 11 days after the exercise on Dreth 4. The chamber was a large circular room on the upper level of the council building on Varith Prime, with seats arranged in rising tiers so that every representative could see every other representative. There were 14 species present. The ceiling was high and the lighting was the soft gold that the Sarati preferred, which had a calming effect on most species present, a deliberate choice that had been made so long ago nobody remembered making it anymore. The official agenda said, Human Integration into Allied Frameworks, Preliminary Assessment. This was accurate as far as it went, but everyone who had been invited to the session understood that the real subject was simpler and harder. What are we dealing with, exactly, and what do we do about it? Council Chair Velron opened the proceedings. She was ancient even by Sarati standards, her memory went back 400 years, and she had overseen more sessions than most of the other representatives had been alive for. She had a way of speaking that was very quiet and very precise. She laid out the facts in order. The Helix Station Report. The Database Assessment. The Dreth 4 Exercise. She did not editorialize. She presented the information and let it sit in the room. Then she nodded to Admiral Das, who stood and addressed the chamber. Das had been a military commander before he became a council advisor. He was not a creature who frightened easily or exaggerated for effect. He chose his words carefully. He said that the original threat model the council had been using for humanity was built on a fundamental misunderstanding. The model treated the special forces as the relevant reference point, the peak of what human soldiers could do, and measured everything else against that peak. By this model, the special forces were frightening, the regular army was concerning, and everything below that was manageable. The model is wrong, Das said. We built our assessment around the wrong category. We thought the special forces were the ceiling. They are not the ceiling. They are the ceiling that has a name. The floor of what we have observed from their regular soldiers is already higher than the ceiling we train our own best soldiers to reach. The chamber was quiet. A representative from the Keth Directorate, a thin gray figure named Velshar who spoke rarely and only when he had something specific to say, raised a hand. He asked if the exercise results were considered statistically significant given the sample size. Drossel, sitting at the analyst's table to the side of the main floor, pulled up her compiled data and walked the chamber through it. Not just the exercise. The full record, every engagement, every incident report, every after-action summary she had processed. She had found 412 documented instances of human soldiers, not special forces, performing actions that would have earned legendary status in any other species' military history. She had a list. She could provide individual names, dates, and circumstances for every one. The chamber absorbed this in silence. Admiral Das spoke again. He said that the question before them was not whether humans were a military threat, that was settled, but rather what kind of threat they were, and whether the nature of that threat was something the Council could understand well enough to respond to intelligently. This opened the debate that had been waiting behind all the careful language. Several representatives made the biological argument. Human physiology was genuinely unusual, pain tolerance significantly above most species' baseline, sleep requirements that could be compressed in crisis conditions without immediate impairment, an endocrine response to danger that produced, in many individuals, heightened rather than degraded function. These were real advantages and they explained some of what had been observed. The representative from the Varati Collective put forward data on this with the thoroughness of someone who had been preparing it for a while. Others pushed back. Physiology did not fully explain the Keth marksman refusing to enter terrain. It did not explain the supply cache. It did not explain the private on the river crossing who held a position for 6 hours on 2 wounds, or the 41 soldiers who held a mountain pass for 30 hours, or the fact that in every engagement Drossel had documented, the humans behaved as if what they were doing was simply the expected thing to do, not something requiring special courage. It was Dr. Vorin who finally said the thing that the room had been circling. She was a xenopsychologist, young for her field, with a reputation for conclusions that made other scientists uncomfortable. She had been sitting quietly through most of the debate. When Velron recognized her, she stood and took a moment to organize her thoughts before she spoke. "I think we have been asking the wrong question," she said. "We have been asking why individual humans perform this way. But I believe the answer is not individual. I believe the answer is cultural." She paused. "Humans do not produce exceptional soldiers," she said. "They produce a culture in which ordinary people expect to do extraordinary things when the situation requires it. The soldier holding the river crossing does not believe he is being heroic. He believes he is doing his job. He believes that what he is doing is what a person in his situation is supposed to do. This belief is not special. It is widely shared. It is taught to them, not in military training, but before that. In the stories they tell. In the histories they write. In the way they talk about their past." She looked around the chamber. "This is not an army of heroes," she said. "This is an army of people who believe that what heroes do is simply what soldiers do. The courage is not remarkable to them. The endurance is not remarkable to them. The refusal to stop is not remarkable to them. These are not extraordinary qualities they call on in extreme moments. These are ordinary qualities they expect of themselves every day." The chamber was very quiet. Velron did not call for an immediate vote on anything. She adjourned the session and told the representatives they would reconvene in 3 days to discuss recommendations. People filed out slowly, in small groups, speaking in low voices. Drossel sat at her table and looked at her list of 412 names. She thought about what Vorin had said. She thought about Laura Neff saying he needed to stay, so he stayed, as if that explained everything. As if that were the most obvious thing in the world. Maybe it was, she thought. Maybe that was exactly the problem. Kael'vas came back to Helix Station on a gray morning, if morning meant anything in a place that orbited a dim star. The docking procedure was the same as before. The corridors smelled the same, metal and recycled air and, faintly, coffee. The treaty documents were in a sealed case under his arm. After months of negotiation, of careful language and slow agreements, it had come down to this: a room, a table, and signatures. He had requested the same security detail. This was not strictly necessary. The station was secure. The treaty was friendly. There was no credible threat. But he had requested them anyway, and when the elevator opened and Cole Rayner was standing there, Kael'vas felt something that took him a moment to identify as relief. Cole was a sergeant now. The extra stripe was visible on his collar. He greeted Kael'vas the same way he had the first time, calm, direct, a small nod. No formality beyond what was necessary. He had the same quality of stillness that Kael'vas remembered. The same sense of someone who was entirely present without being tense. "Good to see you again, sir," Cole said. "And you," Kael'vas said. He meant it more than was perhaps appropriate for a diplomat. They walked together toward the conference room. Kael'vas had looked up what Cole had done between their 2 meetings. There had been an engagement on the Kareth border, a withdrawal under fire, a rearguard action, the kind of situation that military records described in careful, dry language that did not fully convey what they were describing. Cole's unit had held a position while transport ships completed evacuation. The records mentioned that Cole had personally remained at the rearmost point until the last transport left. They mentioned this in the same tone that a report might mention that someone had filed paperwork correctly. "I read about the Kareth engagement," Kael'vas said, as they walked. Cole glanced at him. "Oh. The border action. The withdrawal." "Yes, sir. The records describe what you did there." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Someone needed to stay at the back," he said. "My people needed time to get to the ships. Somebody had to give them that time." Kael'vas nodded slowly. He waited to see if Cole would add anything. justification, or context, or something that would make it larger or more complicated than it appeared on the surface. Cole did not add anything. That was the whole account. Someone needed to stay, so he stayed. Were you afraid? Kael'vas asked. Cole seemed to actually think about this. Not the performance of thinking, genuine consideration, like a man running the memory back through and checking it honestly. Yeah, he said. But that is just part of it, is not it? Kael'vas did not answer, because he did not have an answer. He was not sure the question had an answer that he would understand. The treaty was signed in a small conference room with wide windows that looked out on the star field. Representatives from both sides sat across from each other at a long table. There were speeches, brief ones, because everyone present had read enough speeches. There were signatures in 14 places. There were handshakes, or the approximation thereof. The formal alliance between humanity and the Galactic Council was recorded in 4 languages and transmitted to both capitals simultaneously. After, the room loosened. People moved around, exchanging the small talk that comes after formal things end. Someone produced glasses of something and passed them around. Kael'vas stood near the window for a while and watched the star field and thought about the past months, the long slow process of getting to this room, the shape of what had been built. He was still thinking when he heard voices in the corridor outside. 2 of Cole's soldiers were there, visible through the narrow window in the door. One was young, barely past the beginning of adulthood in human terms, with a round face and an expression of careful attention. Her name tag said Diane. She had arrived on the station 3 days ago, according to the briefing Kael'vas had read, her first assignment, first posting. She was talking to the other soldier, older, with gray at his temples and the particular quietness of someone who had been doing this long enough that most things no longer surprised him. His name tag said Marcus. Diane was asking him something. Her voice was too low to make out through the door, but her face was easy to read, the question of a young person who is new to something and is trying to understand what it actually is, as opposed to what they have been told it is. Marcus listened. He thought for a moment. Then he said something. Again too quiet to hear clearly, but Kael'vas caught a few words, mostly it is waiting. And then, but when it is not waiting, you do what you have to do. Diane nodded. She nodded the way young people nod when something confirms what they already thought, or perhaps when something settles a question they had not quite been able to put into words before. Then she straightened and they both went back to watching the corridor in the calm, present way that Cole's soldiers always watched their surroundings. Kael'vas stood at the window for a long time. He thought about everything he had seen in the past months. The coffee cups and the 4 minutes and the 12 raiders. The list of 412 names. The cold gray moon and the general who could not stop looking at a ration list. The emergency session and Dr. Voren's quiet voice saying this is not an army of heroes. The river crossing and the mountain pass and the boy who liked fishing. He thought about Diane's nod. The simple, easy agreement of someone being told a thing they already understood in their bones. He thought about what it meant that you do what you have to do was not a hard truth to them. It was not philosophy or preparation or something they had to work their way toward in a crisis. It was just the answer to the question. The natural end of the sentence. He went back to his quarters that evening and opened his report on the terminal. The report was long. It covered everything, the history of the negotiations, the terms of the treaty, the Council's strategic position going forward, the recommended next steps for the alliance. At the end there was a section labeled Recommendations. He had written several paragraphs there already. He read them back. They were thorough and detailed and said many correct things. He deleted them. Then he sat for a while in the quiet. Then he typed 4 words. Do not make enemies. He looked at those 4 words for a long time. Then he saved the file and sent it to Velron's office and closed the terminal and went to the window. Outside, the station turned slowly in the dark, and somewhere in its corridors, Cole Rayner's soldiers were doing what they always did. Watching. Waiting. Ready to do what they had to do, the way they always were, the way they had always been, long before anyone outside their small blue world had thought to pay attention.